All football clubs face challenges. Buying and selling players, making the right managerial appointments, balancing the books. It's not easy. And all that whilst trying to progress as a club and climb ever further up the league table. Some clubs face bigger challenges than others though. Chelsea are under a lot of pressure right now, currently 10th in the Premier League table despite having had by far the highest spending season in, well, the entire history of football, but at least they don't have to worry about mortar shells raining down on Stamford Bridge, destroying the old ground, and killing thousands in the process. Juventus are in real bother over in Serie A, recently slapped with a 15-point deduction that puts them outside of the European places, but Manuel Locatelli and Juan Cuadrado haven't yet been conscripted, and there is little suggestion that Massimiliano Allegri is on the verge of being captured by rebel forces and executed in a Fiorentina-inspired terror campaign. I am going to look extremely stupid and insensitive if that actually happens now, but clearly, different football clubs encounter different challenges, and those based in active conflict zones are confronted with some of the most unenviable difficulties of all. Given that there are several ongoing wars around the world, tens of major armed conflicts, and hundreds of skirmishes and separatist movements, there is no lack of football clubs blighted by violence and destruction. In today's video, I wanted to take a look at some of those clubs in some of the most perilous conflict zones on Earth right now, some of whom will be very familiar to most of you and some of whom won't, to see how these clubs have been impacted by war, their roles, if any, in those conflicts, and how football has endured, if indeed it has, in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Without further ado then, who is neither a football club, nor is he based in an active war zone, at least as far as I'm aware, here are 7 football clubs that are based in active conflict zones. 7th, FC Desna Chernihiv. The Russo-Ukrainian War is currently the world's deadliest armed conflict, although the exact number of casualties remains unknown. Given the scale of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which began with the annexation of Crimea in 2014, but was greatly escalated by the full-scale invasion, which Russia launched in February 2022, every Ukrainian football club has been impacted. FC Sevastopol, for example, finished 9th in the Ukrainian Premier League in the 2013-14 season, but had to ask UEFA for permission to join the Russian league system that summer, after Russia annexed the region. UEFA refused, so the Crimean Premier League was created, administered directly by UEFA, which has just 8 teams, only 5 of whom have ever competed at a professional level before. FC Sevastopol were refounded as FK Chernomorets Sevastopol and have since won 4 out of a possible 7 Crimean Premier League titles, but there are numerous clubs who have borne the brunt of Russia's invasion even more harshly than them. Shakhtar Donetsk, Ukraine's second most successful club, and by far the most successful over the past decade, have been exiled from their home ground, the Donbass Arena, which is around 40 miles from the border with Russia, since the 2014 war in Donbass, having been moved first to Lviv, then to Kharkiv, and now the capital of Kyiv. Last season's Ukrainian Premier League had to be terminated entirely following Russia's escalation, with no title being awarded or relegation imposed. The league has returned this season, despite fears and criticism from some that games could become high-profile targets of missile attacks, with teams from the east like Zorya Luhansk and Shakhtar playing their home games further west. 2 teams from last season's Ukrainian Premier League were forced to withdraw from the league this season due to the damage and destruction inflicted on their cities and facilities, namely FC Mariupol and Desna Chernihiv. The historic city of Chernihiv isn't in the east of Ukraine, but in the north, close to the border with both Russia and Belarus, and on the original route to the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, back when Vladimir Putin thought that Russia could take Kyiv in just 2 days. The siege of Chernihiv lasted for almost 6 weeks, before ending in Russian withdrawal and the adoption of a different, failed route to the Ukrainian capital, but not without significant damage having been done. An estimated 700 civilians were killed, in addition to almost 500 soldiers on both sides. Much of the city was flattened, and Chernihiv continues to come under intermittent Russian shelling. This is what the Chernihiv Stadium, formerly the Yuri Gagarin Stadium, now looks like, having been virtually reduced to rubble during the siege. It's no surprise, therefore, that Desna Chernihiv has been temporarily disbanded, and whilst the Russian Premier League has put in place provisions for both them and FC Mariupol to return to the top flight if refounded, the extremely arduous and expensive rebuilding of Ukraine required to facilitate something like that is unlikely to begin until the conflict is somehow brought to an end. 6th, Hanthawadi United FC. We began this 7 with a club hit harder than any other by the most high-profile conflict in the world right now, but Hanthawadi United FC are a club in the midst of a conflict that receives significantly less coverage, not least here in the West. Internal conflicts in Myanmar, which have been uninterrupted, albeit raging at various intensities since 1948, have claimed the lives of around 200,000 people, more than 20,000 of them in 2022 alone, and thousands more already in 2023. A former British colony, known as Burma until 1989, Myanmar was occupied by the Japanese during World War II, before being reconquered by the Allies and gaining independence in 1948. Myanmar is a country of almost 54 million people, made up of 135 distinct ethnic groups, and it has been plagued by one of the world's longest-running civil conflicts since independence, caused in large part by ethnic strife. There are numerous armed militias operating in Myanmar, representing different ethnic groups, fighting both each other and the State Administration Council's armed forces, the Tatmadaw. In 2021, Myanmar was subject to yet another military coup when the Tatmadaw overthrew the democratically elected members of the country's government, prompting a particularly bloody flashpoint in Myanmar's ongoing civil war. China has added further fuel to the fire in Myanmar, particularly since the world has been distracted by war in Ukraine, and Russia, China, and India have all been accused of having made efforts to prevent democracy from flourishing in the country. Hanthawadi United, our club of interest, were founding members of the Myanmar National League in 2009, enjoying their best ever season in 2020 when they finished as the division's runners-up. The following season, Myanmar's league system was suspended as a result of the coup and civil unrest. Hanthawadi United are based in the ancient city of Bargo, which bore witness to one of the most disgraceful scenes of the entire civil war, when Myanmar's armed forces and police forces massacred 82 civilians and displaced a further 100,000 from a city of only 250,000 people. The Tatmadaw subsequently demanded $85 from each of the families of civilians that they had killed in order to retrieve their bodies. Despite the devastation and ongoing conflict, the Myanmar National League returned in 2022, and Hanthawadi United finished third, the same position that they currently occupy, 5 games into the current campaign. 5th, PSG. The city of Paris, home of Paris Saint-Germain, has been hit by a flurry of bombs over the last... Wait. What? Hang on. I am being told that it isn't a bombing campaign at all, it's just that the French remain the undefeated striking champions of the world. Paris has spent much of the last few weeks on fire, again, following pension reform forced through the French Parliament without a vote, increasing the pension age from 62 to 64. The French government has survived 2 no-confidence votes, but only very narrowly, only by 9 votes in the second instance, putting grave pressure on President Emmanuel Macron, and further protests and civil unrest look likely to continue. Here in the UK, a lot of people like to mock the French for their strike culture, and no doubt this is not how a functional country should operate, But then you remember that the average French household is about £9,000 a year richer than the average British household, and the UK pension age is already 66, with a rise to 68 scheduled within the next 15 years. Sure makes you think. Nonetheless, this was a joke inclusion. France isn't currently at war, unless you count various counterinsurgency conflicts in North Africa, so here is the team that is actually in fifth. Fifth, Fasil Kenamar SC. Ethiopia featured in a recent video that I made about 7 countries that should be better at football, given that it is the second biggest country in Africa, home to more than 100 million people, and football is the country's most popular sport. Yet the men's national team ranks 138th in the world, has only won one African Cup of Nations all the way back in 1962, and has never qualified for the World Cup. That is partly because Ethiopia, which is widely considered to be the birthplace of mankind, and the part of the world where every single one of us can trace our lineage back to, if we were to look back far enough, has endured a bloody and brutal past. Ethiopia's current civil conflict, which began in 2018 with the dissolution of the ethnic federalist dominant party political coalition, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, has claimed the lives of somewhere between 400 to 800,000 people in just 5 short years. The city of Gondar, where Fasil Kenamar SC, sometimes referred to as Fasil City, are based, is no stranger to violence. Once the capital of the Ethiopian Empire, the Battle of Gondar was the last stand of Italian forces in what was then known as Italian East Africa, and it ended in a crushing defeat for the Italians. Whilst many cities in Ethiopia are actually relatively safe, despite the ongoing civil conflict, tensions in the Amhara region where Gondar is based have frequently come to a head. A territorial dispute between elites in the Amhara region and those in neighbouring Tigray has been simmering for at least 25 years, and the 2-year Tigray War of 2020 to 2022 claimed the lives of more than 500,000 people according to some sources, displaced nearly 1 million, and left 13 million deprived of food and basic resources. Despite this, the Ethiopian Premier League has gone on uninterrupted, only cancelled in the 2019-20 season as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Fasil Kenamar actually won their first league title when football resumed in the 2020-21 campaign. Fourth, Shabab El Khalil SC. You may or may not be aware of it, but there are some tensions in Western Asia between Israel and Palestine. Though it is the least deadly conflict to feature in this 7, having claimed 255 lives in 2022, 99 already in 2023, and just shy of 30,000 in total over the last 75 years, that is partly because the parties involved just have far smaller populations. Israel and Palestine have a combined population of fewer than 15 million people, but the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the world's most enduring conflicts, and with no end in sight. In fact, the election of Israel's current coalition government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, which includes far-right parties and politicians like the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who lives in an illegal Israeli settlement, has made the prospect of peace seem further away than ever. Whilst Israel are UEFA members, which I have made a whole video about, Palestine are AFC members, and the Palestinian Football Association administers 2 separate but equal top flights, namely the West Bank Premier League and the Gaza Strip Premier League, founded in 1944 and 1976 respectively. The West Bank Premier League is the older of the 2, and in 2010, it became the first professional football league in Palestine, a move which was marked by the signing of a handful of relatively high-profile players. Palestinian football is, unsurprisingly dysfunctional, given the circumstances, but also remarkably durable, and to be ranked 93rd in the world alone is an achievement of sorts. Shabab Al-Khalil SC, based in the city of Hebron, are the reigning champions and the most successful club in the history of the West Bank Premier League, with 7 league titles to their name in total. Hebron, which is the second largest city in the West Bank, behind East Jerusalem, is now considered one of the most dangerous cities in Western Asia. Home to over 200,000 Palestinians and between 500 to 800 Israeli settlers, Hebron has been divided into 2 zones, H1, which is governed by the Palestinian Authority, and H2, which is under Israeli military control since 1997. As such, Hebron is like a microcosm of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but that hasn't stopped Shabab Al-Khalil, who play at the 18,000 capacity Jora International Stadium, from winning title after title in the WBPL. Third, Al Fatouh SC. Many of the world's bloodiest, most belligerent, and persistent conflicts are based in the Arab world for a variety of historic, colonial, religious, and broader geopolitical reasons, and that means that many of the football teams that feature in this 7 are based in the Arab world as well. Al Fatouh SC, who were founded some 93 years ago in 1930, are one of the oldest football clubs in Syria. To describe Syria as being troubled would be an understatement of quite epic proportions. Unrest in Syria, on a mass scale at least, began with the Arab Spring protests throughout the region in 2011. Syria is ruled by a cruel and brutal dictator in the form of Bashar al-Assad, who became president in 2000 when his father, Hafez al-Assad, who turned Syria into a one-party dictatorship after seizing control through a series of coups, died of a heart attack. The Syrian civil war is complex due to the presence of numerous groups, forces, and coalitions often united in opposition to Assad, but in very little else, and therefore frequently warring not only with the Syrian army, which is supported in the conflict by both Russia and Iran, but also with each other. Throw in the presence of several jihadist terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, the Al-Nusra Front, and most notably at one time ISIS, and you have what is among the gravest humanitarian crises that you can find anywhere in the world. Al Fatouh SC are based in Deir ez-Zor, which is the largest city in eastern Syria, and has witnessed some of the worst atrocities of the Syrian civil war. An epicenter of the early protests in 2011, ISIS announced the annexation of Deir ez-Zor in 2014, beginning a 3-year siege which claimed thousands of lives before Daesh were defeated. ISIS once held around a third of Syria and 40% of Iraq. Now it is greatly diminished, but Deir ez-Zor was ISIS's last stand in Syria. It is the Syrian city in which the terror group remains most active, and as recently as December 2022, just a few months ago, 12 oil workers were killed by Islamic State militants. In the midst of all this lies Al Fatouh SC, Syrian League champions in 1990 and in 1991. The club's stadium, first opened in 1960, was badly damaged between 2015 and 2017, whilst it was occupied by Islamic State, during which time Al Fatouh were perhaps somewhat unsurprisingly relegated. They bounced back in 2019 though, and have survived by the skin of their teeth in the 3 seasons since, and this season, it seems as though the Blue Knights, as they are affectionately known, may have no such relegation concerns, currently just 2 points off the top of the Syrian Premier League table. Second, Damaywand Atalan FC. One of the great tragedies of the current state of countries like Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, which have become bywords for war and destruction in recent years, and there is no lack of them, is that they were once among the most liberal and intellectually curious countries or regions in the world. Today, Afghanistan is home to the greatest humanitarian crisis in the world. After the 20-year war in Afghanistan came to an end in 2021, and the Taliban rapidly retook control of the country, almost as though the last 2 decades and trillions of dollars of expenditure had never happened. One of the problems in Afghanistan was that the governments led by Hamid Karzai and later Ashraf Ghani were so spectacularly corrupt, meaning that much of the more than $2 trillion that was spent there was simply fluttered away. You might be wondering, given that the US withdrew its troops from Afghanistan in 2021, ending the longest war in the history of the United States, why is an Afghan club even featuring in this seven? Well, Damaiwand Atalan FC, who were Afghan Premier League runners-up in both the 2016 and 2017 seasons, are based in the city of Kandahar. Other than Helmand, there is probably no other city in Afghanistan that is so synonymous with conflict in recent decades, and since the US withdrew from Afghanistan, Kandahar has become the most dangerous city in the country. That's because Kandahar is the primary target of ISKP, or Islamic State Khorasan Province, Afghanistan's branch of Daesh, which was created by disaffected Taliban fighters with overseas support. Not powerful enough to take control of Afghanistan from the Taliban, but still capable of needlessly killing loads of people, ISKP have focused much of their efforts on Kandahar, where they carried out a bombing campaign at a Shia mosque in 2021, which killed at least 65 people and injured a further 70. The Taliban have tended to be fairly disinterested in football, despite its popularity in Afghanistan, other than forcibly preventing women from playing the sport through threat of death, and in the late 1990s, the home of Afghan football, the Ghazi Stadium, where the national team plays their home games, was used primarily for Taliban executions. As the region's only top-flight team competing in the Afghanistan Champions League, Damaiwand Atalan FC represent basically all of Afghanistan's most dangerous cities, including Helmand and Kandahar, and they play their home games at the Kandahar Stadium, a 5,000-seater arena that was built with US funds during the 20-year occupation. First, AS Dauphins Noirs. It makes sense that we should end a video with a theme of ongoing, bloody, and desperate conflicts in perhaps the bloodiest and most desperate place on Earth, which receive next to no attention throughout so much of the world. There are not one, not two, not three, not even four, but 5 ongoing conflicts in the DR Congo, from the Ituri conflict, which began in 1999 and has claimed more than 65,000 lives, to the Katanga insurgency, which has been ongoing since 1963, with a tragically steady stream of fatalities throughout that time. Once known as Zaire, a one-party totalitarian military dictatorship run by Mobutu Sese Seko, DR Congo is among the richest countries on Earth in terms of natural resources. Yet it is one of the worst countries in the world in terms of life expectancy, infant mortality, and GDP per capita. The First Congo War from 1966 to 1997 claimed around 250,000 lives, meanwhile the Second Congo War from 1998 to 2003 was the world's deadliest conflict since World War II, causing more than 5 million excess deaths. AS Dauphins Noirs, who are not to be confused, I repeat, not to be confused with the French potato-based dish, are based in the city of Goma, right on the border with Rwanda, and their recent history has been defined by the Rwandan genocide, the First and Second Congo Wars, and subsequent conflicts. In late 2012, the March 23rd movement rebel group captured Goma in the M23 rebellion with the support of the Rwandan and Ugandan governments, which saw hundreds killed and around 140,000 people displaced. Government forces have since retaken the city. As if all of that weren't enough, Mount Nyiragongo volcano 7 miles north of the city has had 2 major eruptions already this century, in 2002 and 2021, the first of which destroyed 40% of the city, and the second claiming a further 1,000 homes. In the midst of all this devastation lies AS Dauphins Noirs, who play their home games at the appropriately named Stade de Volcan and compete in the nation's top flight, which is known as Linefoot. They are yet to be crowned as champions of DR Congo, and currently sit third from bottom in the league, though one would imagine that is hardly the biggest of their concerns. For anyone who might be interested, I have made a longer video about the history of DR Congo, as viewed through the lens of their infamous showing as Zaire at the 1974 World Cup, which I think is quite interesting, along with a video about the consequences of the Taliban's 2021 takeover on football in Afghanistan, both of which I will leave links to in the end screen, at least if I can remember. I have been known to forget. Anyway, that is it for today's video. Thank you all very much as of watching. I hope that you, again, enjoy is maybe the wrong word, but found it interesting. Hit the like button if that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, both for HITC Sevens and my backup channel, both of which should be on your screens now. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.